In the last two videos, we've seen how Deleuze opens the circle of the proposition to discover that sense hides in the relation between divergent series, in the empty box, which connects specific singularities together. These singularities are things like the sounds and meanings that compose a language, and they connect in and through the empty box. But it is also true that language can only be spoken by individuals, so in the third part of Logic of Sense, Deleuze discusses the relation between individuality and sense-making. In a characteristic reversal, he explains that it is not individuals that produce sense in language, but rather it is sense that produces individuals. This is what Deleuze calls the dynamic genesis of sense. We've seen how sense differentiates sounds from noises. It does so on a surface on which bodies and words are separated. But precisely what is this surface, and how does it relate to the individual? It is fitting for Deleuze to use psychoanalysis at this point because, on the one hand, psychoanalysis is the study of individual development, but it's also an opportunity for Deleuze to formulate his own view of psychoanalysis, preparing, in many ways, his next book, The Anti-Oedipus, which he wrote with Felix Guattari. The journey of the individual, Deleuze shows, does not begin in peace. It has a terrifying start, in fact. For we were all born in an abyss, in the terrifying depth of what you could call a primordial chaos. He says, the history of depth begins with what is most terrifying. It begins with the theatre of terror. The actors in this theatre of terror are of two kinds. On the one hand, partial bodies, which are indistinguishable from each other because the way they work is by projection and introjection, meaning that they don't have firm boundaries or limits, but they are active nonetheless, clashing incessantly with each other. But in this pit of wild beasts, as Deleuze says, something occurs, a light of hope, a reaction to the chaos, the premises of a hero figure who will confront the titans and send them back to hell. This is the second type of bodies we encounter in the depth. They have firm boundaries and are not composed of parts. These are the bodies without organs. So Deleuze says, on one hand, the depth presents blocks of coexistence, bodies without organs or words without articulation. On the other hand, it presents sequences of partial objects, bound only by the common property of being detachable and fragmentable, introjectable and projectable, bunting and causing to burst. The world of the depth is called the schizoid position because it's made of these two types of bodies, partial and without organs. The chaos of partial objects is extremely noisy. It's like the sound of animals fighting and shouting. No words are uttered. This battleground is where children experience the early stages of their development, but it's also the dwelling place of the schizophrenic. So Deleuze says, the same duality of complementary poles that we find in early childhood, partial objects and bodies without organs, is found again in schizophrenia between reiterations and perseverations, between jaw grinding and catatonia, for example. The first bears witness to internal objects and to the bodies they break to pieces. The same bodies which break them to pieces, the second manifests, the body without organs. So the titans and the wild beasts of the depths manifest themselves in unarticulated sounds, physical tensions that traverse the bodies of the baby and of the schizophrenic. They are opposed by a body without organs. At this point, Deleuze says, the tension between id and ego is formed. Two depths are opposed, a hollow depth wherein bits whirl about and explode, and full depth. In Freudian psychoanalysis, the id and the ego are two aspects of the psyche. The abysmal id is the part of the mind in which innate instinctive impulses and primary processes are said to originate. In the tension between the id and the ego, a third term appears which regulates their relation, and that is the superego. The superego is the part of the mind that acts as self-critical conscience, the part that enforces social norms and rules, and thus censors the primordial instincts of the id. It is a properly good object, unlike the body without organs, and as such it rises out of the abyss. The savage beasts of the depth are not done yet. A feud between the superego and the id takes place. Deleuze says, the body of the infant is like a den full of introjected savage beasts, which endeavor to snap up the good object. The object, in turn, behaves in their presence like a pitiless bird of prey. So out of the abyss, the superego rises like a pitiless bird of prey. It flies high above, such that a new duality is produced, not between partial and full, but between high and low. The superego is said to be a voice, but one which does not speak an articulated language. The superego introduces two new components in the psyche, love and hate. Deleuze says, under these circumstances, the ego identifies with the good object, patterning itself after it in a model of love and partaking of its power and its hatred toward the internal object. But it also partakes of its wounds and of its suffering under the blows of these bad objects. On the other hand, it identifies itself with these bad partial objects which endeavor to catch the good object. It offers assistance, alliance, and even pity. Such is the vortex id, ego, superego, in which everyone receives as many blows as he meets out, and which characterizes the manic-depressive position. Let us regroup our findings so far. Out of the pure chaos of partial objects, a body appears which reacts to the mechanisms of introjection and projection by blocking them. It's the body without organs, which opposes silence to the noise and closes itself to the introjections and projections of the partial bodies. Here, the tension between id and ego is formed, and out of this tension a properly good object emerges, the superego, to which the ego tries to identify and which distributes love and hate. This defines the second stage of psychological development and is called the depressive position. These two positions, schizoid and depressive, are not abstractions. They are familiar to us and we experience them every day. So for example, Deleuze says, we constantly relive in our dreams the passage from noise to voice. Observers have correctly noted how sounds reaching the sleeper were organized in the voice ready to awaken him. We are schizophrenic while sleeping, but manic-depressive when nearing the point of awakening. But precisely why is the second position called depressive? That is because of the nature of the superego. It is always already lost, either gone or broken. The good object, the superego, Deleuze says, is by nature a lost object. It only shows itself and appears from the start as already lost, as having been lost. Its eminent unity lies here. Only as lost, the good object confers its love on to the one who is able to find it for the first time, as found again, in French retrouvé, the ego which identifies with it. And it confers its hate on the one who approaches it aggressively as something discovered or exposed and yet already there, the ego taking the side of internal objects. This means that the unconscious or preconscious stage of life begins in disappointment. The good object is gone or it's broken, and it's at this condition that the ego develops to full maturity. This is why Deleuze can say, in the unconscious everyone is the offspring of divorced parents, dreaming of restoring the mother and bringing about the return of the father, pulling him back from his retreat. It seems to us that this is the basis of what Freud called the familial romance and its linkage with the Oedipus complex. So the Oedipus complex, understood correctly, describes this strange observation that as we grow up, something feels lost, lost innocence or lost paradise. It expresses this desire that we all have, maybe, which is famous in literature and cinema, of re-establishing wholeness through the return of the king. I'm not suggesting, of course, that great works of art can be reduced to a simple psychological determination such as this, but it may nonetheless be part of their appeal. Let us note in passing that this account of personal development does not contradict Deleuze's argument in the anti-Oedipus, because what Deleuze and Guattari deny is not the Oedipus complex itself so much as its generalization by Freud and his followers over all aspects of psychological life, making it a primordial determinant of the psyche when in fact, as a concept, the Oedipus complex is a product of the psyche, not a cause. But this is a discussion for another time. Let us go back to our subject. What is this depressive position? What is it defined by? Deleuze says, this is no longer the deep world of the simulacra, the objects of the depth, but rather that of the idol on high. It is no longer a matter of mechanisms of introjection and projection, but of identification. So in other words, the superego introduces the problem of love and hate in the psyche by forming a world of identity and sameness. The idol says to the ego, if you look like me, you're loved, but if you don't, you're not. And this is in fact how the idol speaks to us. It does not have a language, but it has a voice. Deleuze says, for it is this object, the idol, that from among all the sounds of the depth extracts a voice. If we take into consideration the characteristics of the good object, of being found only as lost, of appearing for the first time as already there, etc., it seems that they are necessarily gathered into a voice which speaks and comes from on high. He continues, the voice, though, presents the dimensions of an organized language, without yet being able to grasp the organizing principle according to which the voice itself would be a language. And so we are left outside sense, far from it, this time in a pre-sense, in French pré-sens, of heights. The fact that the voice speaks but does not have a language yet means that the voice is not univocal. It does not come from a defined individual. To use a metaphor, the totem speaks but does not move its lips, and in fact it has many mouths and many faces. So the voice of the idol does not have a clear origin. We don't know who speaks, what is signified, or what is said. Yet we have an intuition of what is to come, namely univocal language, meaning language that is unambiguous and has one voice, which is the sense of univocal. In the final step of psychological development, which is the point at which the voice becomes speech, the ego is fully formed, and in fact it is completed only once the voice has turned into speech. What is the determinant factor of this process of univocalization? Deleuze tells us this. Only when something is identified between divergent series or between incompossible worlds, which are essentially contradictory or impossible statements, an object equals X appears transcending individuated worlds, and the ego which thinks it transcends worldly individuals, giving thereby to the new world a new value in view of the new value of the subject which is being established. The object equals X removes ambiguous determinations by elevating the expressed word to a new level. It gives it a new power, that of abstraction. So, for example, the fact that you can abstract from the expression this tree, the notion of tree in general, which is the set of all existing trees, is because of the object equals X. In this example, the object is the word tree. And to make it equal to X, that is, to any tree in any situation, shows that language has acquired a new power, which is the power of univocalization. This new power appears along with the fully formed ego. Deleuze says, all objects equal X are persons and are defined by predicates. But these predicates are no longer the analytic predicates of individuals determined within a world which carry out the description of these individuals. On the contrary, they are predicates which define persons synthetically and open different worlds and individualities to them as so many variables or possibilities. The fact that sense is said to be a surface effect is precisely due to this elevation in abstraction that occurs on the surface. This is the final destination of the hero who has acquired univocity of voice through abstraction. Deleuze says, Hercules is always situated relative to the three realms of the infernal abyss, the celestial height, and the surface of the earth. Inside the depth, he comes across only frightening combinations and mixtures. In the sky, he finds only emptiness and celestial monsters duplicating those of the inferno. As for the earth, he is its pacifier and surveyor, and even treads over the surface of its waters. He always ascends or descends to the surface in every conceivable manner. He brings back the hell-hound and the celestial hound, the serpent of hell and the serpent of the heavens. It is no longer a question of Dionysius down below, or of Apollo up above, but of Hercules of the surface, in his dual battle against both depth and height. Reorientation of the entire thought and a new geography. In philosophical terms, we have seen that this is a conquest of time by which the aion cuts the eternal present of chronos into future and past. Aion was said to be both infinitely small and infinitely large. If you recall, Deleuze says, let us understand that each event in the aion is smaller than the smallest subdivision of chronos, but it is also greater than the greater divisor of chronos, namely the entire cycle. As a cut, aion is smaller than the smaller present, but there comes a point where all the line of chronos is cut, and the qualitative change that occurs in which aion becomes larger than chronos reflects the action of the object equals X, namely a qualitative change in how we think about the world and about ourselves. In terms of psychological development, Deleuze says this. The first step of the genesis, from the schizoid to the depressive position, went from noises to the voice, from noises as qualities, actions and passions of bodies in depth, to the voice as an entity of the heights, withdrawn into heights, expressing itself in the name of that which pre-exists, or rather posing itself as pre-existing. The child, of course, comes to a language that she cannot yet understand as language, but only as a voice or as a familial hum of voices which already speaks of her. The child comes to the understanding of linguistic determinations such as moods, tenses, or persons in and through the object equals X, and thus the constitution of the ego is engaged. Remarkable in all of this is the fact that sense is neither given in advance, nor by a given material world, nor by an ideal subject. Deleuze is not a materialist, and he is not an idealist either. But with the genetic method, he offers a solution to this well-known dualism between mind and matter. Sense is the productive entity that forms ego and abstraction. This point is quite important, and it's an important part of Deleuze's work, so we will examine it in the next and final video on logic of sense. Thank you for watching.